let's talk about miracles. Some things that are difficult when it comes to miracles is the fact that the definition can be super, super broad. You can talk about something small, you can talk about something large. So I guess let's just start diving in right there. What do we consider a miracle? Do we draw a line between something which is and isn't a miracle? What do you guys think?
I think miracles are hard to talk about sometimes because they can't be proven. You know, like if you're praying for a miracle for something not to happen, it's just 100% faith, you know, because a naysayer could be like, no, it just didn't happen. Yeah.
No one or nothing intervened to make that thing not happen. It just didn't by the random chance provided by the universe.
Yeah, I think my definition would almost certainly be a cop-out, especially if you're like a skeptic or a cynic that's listening and not a believer, because my undergrad is in biological sciences, specifically wildlife and fisheries biology, but inside of the field of biological sciences. And as I got a greater understanding maybe of the scientific world, and this doesn't frequently happen for people, I recognize that, the deeper understanding I got of the scientific world allowed me to see all of the tiny things that we just take for granted, whether that be cell division or photosynthesis or the kind of things that most people hated studying in school that I really enjoyed studying in school, as being all of these unbelievably complex processes that then when I overlaid that inside of my Christian narrative view of God as creator, sustainer, sovereign over the universe, opened the door for me to go, man, this is all miraculous because it is outside of human ability, if you will. So that would almost be the definition that I would give towards the miraculous, like something that's beyond, that I couldn't do, that I couldn't mandate doing, that I couldn't oversee doing, or any of those kind of things. And I recognize some of that's a cop-out because you're going to go, well, we can split cells. We made an atom bomb. We did all of those kind of things. But all of those, we started with matter. And so for me, even backing up to somebody who subscribes to a more fundamentalist view of even the creation narrative, is going, okay, God started with nothing, and all of this is controlled, sustained in his sovereignty that originated with nothingness. And so mine is, if you want to argue with it, my definition of miracle is going to be very broad and is going to be easily copped out by a cynic of, well, you're just choosing to see everything through the way God would want you to see it, which, sorry, I am.
Yeah.
That's an important question, because one of the things that I've heard a good example of is, like, we have miracles in the Bible on different occasions of Jesus giving sight to the blind. Here recently, y'all probably are all Mr. Beast fans, so I don't have to tell y'all, but for the sake of our listeners, I'll fill them in that Mr. Beast likes to do random things with lots of money because he has lots of money, and the more money he makes, the more things he does, and the more things he does, more money he makes, and it's this cycle. So one of the things that he's done in the last few years was, like, I think he gifted Lasik surgery to 100 random people, and the comparison I heard drawn was, for a lot of those people, before that, they could not see, and now they can see. So is what happened there, even though we understand, like, what LASIK is and what corrective eye surgery is, the fact remains that the standard by which, now Jesus did that without that. Mm-hmm. That is, I think the medical phrase is, the mechanism by which this is accomplished is not fully understood. It's a mystery. There's no mystery to us with LASIK so much, because we've had the curtain pulled back on that, and we can see the mechanism by which this was accomplished. But is that less of a miracle?
Not if you're the one who can see. Yeah, I mean, you get into quantifying, and that gets into the person, like the personableness, if you will. That's not a word, but I just made it one.
Yeah, it is.
Is it? Sweet. Accidentally expanded my vocabulary. That's why some of this conversation is so difficult, because there's so much detail and so much ambiguity in what a miracle is, what a miracle is not, based off of the way that you would define that. And I think every individual is going to define that in a different way. Mine is certainly much more broad than probably the majority of the world, but it's just because I would contend through the power of the Spirit, that's the lens through which I see the world around me. And that invites me into worship and joy and meaning and existence and all of those things as a result of what I believe God has done in me. Not that somebody who doesn't have that is somehow not as spiritual as I am, but it just invites me to see, because I would, in my mind, even as you were talking about that, my mind immediately went to, even if the miracle isn't in the Lasik surgery, which I'm like, when you understand the complexity of that, and I think we have eliminated some of the wonder of what things are in this era of modernity where everything's scientifically explained and reasoned to death. Like if you think about the fact that and this is going to be a terrible representation of Lasik surgery because I don't understand it, is like I would contend that God gave someone the wisdom and ability through practice and the scientific method, that he also gave us the wisdom and ability to understand how we could take a laser and use a laser, a focused light, a hyper-focused light, to repair someone's vision. And I'm like, that's a miracle. And maybe it's also because I don't give myself any credit for being into, I'm like, I could never figure that out, so I'm just dumb. So I'm like, that's a miracle for me because I am dumb.
Well, my simple version of a miracle, and you said it can be different for everyone, is an act of God. And so the Lasik surgery itself in this story, to me, is not the miracle. The miracle is that this person was randomly chosen to receive this magic money that came out of nowhere, and they got their eyesight back.
That's where I was headed next, is that like we can touch on those things, but the bigger picture of like, I mean, the fact that Mr. Beast is like a fixture at all in our society, and the number of things that must line up for this to have happened. The miracle, even if it's not necessarily, if the science of Lasik is understood, perhaps the whole thing is miraculous, because, I mean, what are the odds?
Yeah.
It's like looking for a planet that could sustain life.
Yeah. But then if you win the lottery, is it a miracle? I'm arguing against myself.
Yes, and I'm actively praying for one. Also, you got to play to win.
Maybe this is hair splitting, but it does feel a bit like semantically we're playing a game where instead of saying this is the definition of a miracle, we're instead couching it as, well, it's more than, and then filling in the blank. But we're not really, the closest I've heard so far was Rick saying it's something outside of human capability or something along those lines. But I think even that is like, that's still kind of a strange way to contextualize it, because then like the damage caused by a hurricane is outside of the ability of mankind. Does it being outside the ability of mankind like satisfy all the criteria for a miracle? Is that a miracle?
We don't call that a miracle. We call that an act of God.
Yeah. There are some acts
which is
of
what
God
my
which
definition was.
Yeah. But you see the struggle we're getting into is mostly we're reaffirming this idea that it's more than just something that is by its nature unexplainable or supernatural. It seems like is where like this discussion is going. So can we put more flesh on that in a way that like actually gives us a working definition?
No.
You're the word, dude.
I'm just along for the ride.
Give us the words, Ben.
No, I really don't know.
Give us a definition that we can nitpick, or start with something that we can nitpick. I'm not asking for you to give, this is what I believe a miracle is. I'm asking for you to give, this is a possible meaning.
Yeah, I think the regular use of the word generally employs.
Miracle generally refers to it.
Do you want to share with the class?
I have a fifth microphone. I just don't have a way to record it.
We want to know what it said.
Yeah. What's Gemini say a miracle is? I would say Siri, but everybody's phone at the table will light up.
Not yours.
No, my iPad.
All right, James is now going to give us the dictionary definition from, can you tell us the source? It is Gemini? Okay.
Well,
this is
Gemini, if you count Gemini as a source. That's a different topic.
Yeah. From whatever Gemini scraped to get this data.
Yeah. I hope it was Reddit. All right. This says a, quote, miracle, end quote, generally refers to an extraordinary and astonishing event that is believed to be caused by a power beyond the natural world, often attributed to divine intervention. Intervention is a good word. It's an occurrence that seems to defy the known laws of nature and is thus inexplicable by normal scientific or human means.
There is so much going on in that definition, which is relevant for most of what we've said so far.
So Paul says mystery, and I think mystery is definitely an ingredient in all of this. But that does break what mystery means down in a lot of helpful ways.
Yeah, and mystery can be pretty confusing in itself, because what part is the mystery, right? Is the causal force the mystery? Is the mechanism by which the end is achieved the mystery? Is
the reason for receiving
all of it a mystery? Yeah. Does mystery mean, if we equate mystery and miracle, does that mean we're just supposed to throw up our hands and say, who knows what a miracle is?
Yeah, that gets dangerously close to, I think, of the professors or instructors that I had at Full Sail teaching us about electronic components. And inevitably, when we talked about a new component, they'd say, let's talk about how this works. Magic. And I think the ongoing joke was, if you don't know how it works, it's magic to you.
Yeah, that's a car. Yeah, for anybody that doesn't understand how a car works, like, it's just a car until you sit inside of it and it stops working, and then it's like a box of nightmares. Or magic, I guess. But yeah, that's the tough part when you talk about like, is a miracle something which is supernatural? Because then if you see something that's unexplained, you don't know whether you can attribute that to being supernatural or just not yet understood. And that's when you get into, especially if you're having this conversation between somebody who is and isn't a believer, it becomes an issue of whether or not you're just employing the God of the gaps argument, which is anything we don't currently understand, that's God until we understand it. And then that wasn't, but all this other stuff we don't understand is God.
Yeah, I think that's some of the reason that I've made maybe the distinction that I've made in my mind. And I don't know if it's a spiritual gift or a spiritual discipline or a combination of both of them, in trying to see all of the things that even we've explained in scientific logic or moral reason or whatever other line of thought and thinking we've chosen to employ and crafted over the history of humanity, is, for me, it still doesn't explain away the miraculousness of whatever it is that we're talking about. You know what I mean? And I recognize
maybe a better way to say that, though, would be to say it doesn't matter how well or thoroughly we've explained it. It doesn't take away the fact that it's a revelation of God's glory. The question is whether or not miracle is the best description of that.
Yeah, that's the best
And
word.
I think you almost have to break down into, like, okay, there's the regular use of the word miracle, which is almost certainly something which we would consider supernatural and unexplainable, at least by what we do and don't know currently in this moment. Because we were talking about Lasik and blindness to sightedness, and like, yeah, absolutely, it's the same beginning and end point. But what we can say without any doubt is that Jesus was not employing modern medical needs in order to bring that result about.
He was rubbing mud.
So it's not, but I think that does draw out the important detail that it's not just beginning state to end state. The transition between those two is not what a miracle is. It is the mechanism by which you make that thing happen, at least in the regular use of the word miracle, in my mind, I think.
Which interesting enough, I think still allows for my definition, my own personal definition of what a miracle is, because my understanding of the sovereignty of God, being the theological framework from which I operate, is the mechanism for all of it, despite the temporal mechanism that we may assign to it, is still somehow inextricably linked to the God of the universe, being the author, perfecter of our faith, but the originator of everything in creation. And so I would say that nothing ever happens that God does not have his hand in or is not working through.
So then don't you run into the same problem of then almost everything is a miracle?
So let me ask this question.
And you can say that, and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I interrupted you.
Oh,
so
then
I apologize.
In that case, quiet, James.
Yeah, but then for me, the follow up for that statement would be,
you just interrupted me interrupting James.
Yeah.
Who interrupted
Sam, you interrupt.
Go.
But yeah, the follow up for that statement was, wouldn't you see everything as a miracle? I would say yes, and that is a call to a greater adoration and worship of God that I don't feel that I need to dismiss. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess
I get that maybe
the word feels like it loses everything.
Yeah, well, it cheapens it. Yeah, sure, I get that. And like again, I started the conversation with, hey, if you're a cynic or you're a skeptic or a
But it's not just a cynic or a skeptic. Like, think about, like, in the biblical text, there are things which are miraculous and there are things which are not. I think all of Jesus' miracles specifically end up cheapened in the biblical narrative if the people walking around in the first century, like, see a leaf fall from the tree and gasp because it's a miracle. It's like, if everything is a miracle, then Jesus comes and does miracles. It's like, big deal. I've seen 30 this morning and it's 9 a.m.
Every time I blink.
Yeah, but I get what you mean, and I think you're making a really good point. I just don't know that I would throw the word miracle into that mix.
Yeah.
Because you think about, like, if you reframe it as it's a revelation of God's glory, absolutely it is. But miracles, I think, are of a very particular type, which employs something supernatural.
And then I think some of the struggle of this definition and trying to land on it is we're operating in a post-biblical canon society. So it's like I can't look back and go, because it's like, even in my, and I'll ask the question because you lived through this, like my own personal story. So if you don't know, in 2012 on the way home from small group, I was in a horrific car accident. I don't have a great recollection of what happened, so I can't share that with you. But it started a 3-month process with a few different forms of traumatic brain injury, where all of the measurable empirical medical numbers that they were able to give for what my recovery would look like was not good. Like, go and read it, and I got a novel written about me that I don't understand because it's all medical terminology. Is you should be a vegetable. You should not be independent living. There's a very high chance that you should not even be a functioning adult. And yet, here I am, and I'm not trying to put myself on a pedestal at some day.
Kind of functioning.
Yeah, sort of, kind of.
I had to, sorry.
So I don't understand. And so it's like
that definition.
Like, when you look at that, like, do we define, is it appropriate to define that as a miracle? Is it appropriate to ascribe to my medical recovery, which is outside of the confines of what most of the doctors, or almost all doctors, would say of this medical prognosis is inside of the realm of possibility? Is that a miracle?
You're making the argument that they said it wasn't inside the realm of possibility, and it happened anyway. I don't know that I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, not in
statistically is important, right?
Sure. Yeah,
and I hate to. It sounds like I'm cheapening your and my experience of something incredible.
Yeah,
which I happen to also have enjoyed the benefits of, because I'm pretty glad that you're functional.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
Most days. But yeah, I think percentage being a part of that means that nothing that happened was outside of the realm of scientific possibility, or outside of the abilities of the human body, or outside of it. Again, that doesn't make it less of a revelation of God's glory and how intricately he knit us together to make that.
So I guess what I'm asking is, in the way that you're crafting the definition of a miracle, there has to be no statistical probability that it would happen.
No, not necessarily.
Anyway.
So here's what I would advocate for, now that we've continue to flesh out the definition, and tell me what you guys think of this. If it's not apparent, I'll say as a caveat, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about it. I would maybe advocate for something like a divergence of definitions between two understandings, and you could call it the strict use versus the liberal use. The strict use would be something that is a lot more like, it's not technically a miracle if it's not employing some kind of supernatural means, or if it's not beyond our scope of understanding currently, and our best explanation is something supernatural. Now, part of that runs into issues of presuppositions about the nature of the world around us. You're going to struggle with that definition between someone who's an atheist versus somebody who believes in the supernatural. Obviously, I get that, but that's at least like a definition for the strict definition. Then I think and use of a word in culture is its meaning. And I do think we use miracle more liberally than that very often, which is to say, like, something being miraculous is equivalent to something being incredible, or something being amazing, or something being very, very impressive. Like, that was a miraculous catch in baseball or football or whatever. Like, we use that word a lot more generally than maybe the strict definition would allow, but I think that's okay. But I do think there's something meaningful and useful about a specificity in a more strict definition that prevents some of the struggles that we're talking through.
And then I think then you branch into the conversation, and I don't know that we have time for this in this episode, but you branch into the conversation if you're going to go with the strict definition of miracle, as you just defined it, as this thing that's beyond the realm involving some sort of supernatural is, and we've had these conversations before on here, it branches into the continuous versus cessationist line of thinking in terms of theology, because working of miracles inside of your, at least in my, I would contend this is a true statement, inside the definition that you presented as the strict definition of it. For a cessationist, they would say that miracles like those of the Bible are no longer happening in the world today. Whereas a continuous would say, even inside of your strict definition of miracles, that is still possible for followers of Jesus. And I guess some of maybe...
But the dual definition means you can be a cessationalist who still sees miracles.
Sure.
Essentially, right? Just not the strict sort of miracles.
Yeah. So it'll maybe alleviate some of the tension in that.
Yeah.
Or the need to pick one camp or the other.
Yeah. So honestly, a lot of what we've done up until this point, 20-something minutes in or whatever we've done, has kind of just been laying the groundwork for a much larger conversation on miracles that could take place. Because I think one of the questions that originally piqued our interest was, how did you word it, James? What's the reasonable expectation that I might see a miracle in my lifetime?
As a follower of Jesus.
Yeah, and now we have these kind of branching definitions. And I think, one, we've already answered that question, which is if it's the more liberal or more general understanding of a miracle, the popular use version of miracle, like you already have. Why are we asking the question? But if you take that like more strict definition, like that question, is a big one.
Yeah, that it gets into the groundwork question there, but like that's something that was going through my head as you were talking about that, is that at some point, if you're on the more liberal end of what's a miracle, it depends on like the person that's seeing it, almost more so than we think of like Jesus giving sight to the blind and restoring people's ability to walk, or in some cases giving them that ability for the first time in their life. That's something that anybody who, and it's actually in the Gospels, is like people saw that person later and went, "Hey, wasn't that the guy that couldn't walk, and there he is." So like there's less room, I think, for debate for something like that. Whereas, with the Mr. Beast example, it's I can look at that and go, okay, so 100 more people got the surgery. I mean, they also did that down the road here in Aiken last week, and there's no YouTube video about it, and we didn't bring them up in our discussion. And at that point, it becomes the person. It must look like a miracle to the person experiencing it, kind of thing, as opposed to some objectivity. Another question that came up in my mind, which is completely off the wall, but in the New Testament, the things Jesus did that we say are miraculous, was there always a purpose to what he did?
Yeah. It's not always explicitly stated, but yes, is the answer to that question. If that's what you mean, or are you asking whether it's explicitly stated and Jesus did this because?
I guess some of both. I think of things like the first one that we have record of him turning water into wine. What was the purpose there?
I don't know. I have to look back at the text specifically, but I know all the New Testament miracles are considered enacted miracles, so they're a revelation of something specific about his identity.
Yeah, about who he is or who
there's some kind of symbolic significance to water and wine. I just don't remember what it is.
Yeah, and I can think of some, but really my question because of that is, if the answer to that question is yes, then does that mean that what we categorize as a miracle now has to meet that same standard?
Well, there's different, and Ben, you hinted at this, and I'd have to go back and look at notes and try to remember the words for them. There's different types of miracles inside of the Bible. There's enacted miracles. What are the other categories of miracle?
I don't know what you're talking about, to be honest.
Really? So I thought I could be making that up completely, which is a very good chance. We've been here for 9 days, is trying to determine what the different types of miracles. Some of them are meant to reveal God's character and whatever. And I think probably most of them do fit in there. Now that I'm talking out loud, this feels dumb.
No, I think we're almost headed toward a third branch in the definition, which is a biblical definition of miracle. Which so far our definitions have been informed by the Bible, but we're not doing the very particular task of like almost word study in a biblical context, which I haven't done, but I could if people were interested in that. Comment below.
Yeah. Because I think this is certainly an episode, like a continuation in a future episode for us to maybe continue in our next episode because there's still so many questions and things to dive into, because I would almost, just to tease it out, like the potential of what's the biblical definition of marriage is one question that's still on the table.
Wait, marriage or miracles?
I meant miracles, sorry.
TBI.
Yeah, so much going on. Ouch. Golly, Sam. I'm just going to spike
He's a miracle.
We had talked about it. It felt appropriate.
No, it was not appropriate.
You're fine. That was incredible. So.
And then I thought, even as we were talking about it and you were doing some of that definition work, was what about the exact nature of human salvation? Where does that fit into this conversation?
Like whether it's a miracle?
Yeah. Does it fit inside of that category, or is it its own unique category? Is another question that I would have that would continue in this conversation that'd be worth talking about. So
I want to do word study. Everybody bring a miracle. From the Bible.
I think I've got some.
I got one in my left pocket.
I keep mine in my glove pocket.
James, you can bring water into wine, and then everybody bring one to discuss. Like that's the stuff that
I'm going to find one of those green lizards now. This guy will grow his tail back.
He's got half enough. Already working on it.
I like putting a pin in it there, because really the original question that kind of brought all this to my head was, what should my expectation be for miracles in my life? But the answer to the question we've been drilling at for 20-something minutes now really informs the answer to that ultimate question.
Yeah.
Because you could be, talk about filters, that you're looking for wildly different things depending on what you think and understand a miracle is or isn't.
Yeah. It gets super complex. I'm definitely down to do like a word study / like narrative study on like the different miracles in the Bible and the use of the Greek word for miracle in particular. I can look at Old Testament stuff, but I won't be as well informed.
Do you know what the Greek word is off the top of your head?
No.
Dang.
Blew it.
Okay, if you want to know that word, you got to tune in next episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
See you.